Continuing our lesson on adding and subtracting rational numbers. This is on page 34. And we're going to look at number 4. So number 4 on the do you know how? What is the distance between the top of the fishing pole and the fish? There's different ways to do this problem. What we could look at is take the top point minus the bottom point. We could say the fish is at -4.5. The top of the pole is at a positive 8.5. And we could take 8.5 minus -4.5. Okay, that's kind of what the book's wanting us to do. In which case, remember when we subtract, we can add the opposite, make our sign changes here. Another way simply to do this problem is look at that. The top of the fishing pole is 8.5 feet above. Fish is 4.5 below. So if we do 8.5 plus 4.5, that would tell us the distance between these two. So if we add these together, adding, so we've got 8 plus 4 is 12. A half plus a half is a whole. So 12 plus 1. Total distance would be 13 feet. Number 5, a shark began at 172.5 meters below sea level and then swam up 137.1 meters. Where is the shark's location now? A couple ways to do this problem. Kind of if we sketch this out a little bit, we've got the shark is at 172.5 below sea level, and then it's going up 137.1. Whoops. Okay, so one way of looking at it would be that let's take 172.5 minus 137.1. Is 35.4. So 35.4 meters, that's still below sea level, which is good. We don't have a shark that's floating in the air here. That's probably, to me, the easiest way of doing it. We could, and what the book's kind of wanting us to think about is that we're at -172.5. We go up, so plus 137.1. That would be another way of looking at it. In that case, we are adding, but remember they're different signs. We need to take the difference. We do have more that are negative, so when you work that out, you would get -35.4. So kind of just two different ways of looking at that. Either way would be fine. We look at number 6. They're asking us to find the sum or difference. So, like we've talked about, generally on these, we might see problems where one's a fraction, one's a decimal. In that case, it's probably, unless we have a repeating decimal, be good to change the fraction to a decimal and work it out. This problem, 6a, they both happen to be fractions. So if you want to just keep them as fractions, you can. It's on this problem not a big deal if you change it to decimals, but if we can figure it out with keeping them fractions, that would be potentially maybe less work for us. So adding these together, notice they're different signs. We have positives and negatives, so they are working against each other here, battling it out to see who wins. And so 12.5 minus 4.5, half minus a half, that just cancels. And then 12 minus 4 would be 8. And then if we think about this, we have more negatives than positives. So then our answer would be -8. So part B, these happen to both be decimals, so we don't really need to change that part of it. Since they're subtracting, we can go ahead and add the opposite here, make our two sign changes. At that point, look at the signs, one's negative and one's positive, so different signs, we need to take the difference. So we're going to subtract those. That's 10 hundredths, which is the same as 1/10. You don't have to have the 0 at the end. If you want to keep it there, you can. And if you'll notice, we had more negatives than positives, so that would be a negative 1/10 or negative 10 hundredths. Look at workbook page 9. Number 1, they want us to find the sum. 2/3 plus negative 1/3. These are both fractions. It is addition problem, so that part of it we don't need to worry about adding the opposite or anything. Remember, when you add fractions, before you can add fractions, you have to have common denominator. Okay. In this case, they have already given us a common denominator, so they're being really nice here. This is set up pretty good for us. So since these have different signs, they're working against each other here. We have positives and negatives. So we would need to subtract different signs, take the difference, and then if you subtract those, then that would be 1/3. We had more positives than negatives, so final answer would be just 1/3 or positive 1/3. Number 2, they are actually just asking us whether this would be positive, negative, or 0. They didn't necessarily say that we had to work it out all the way and exactly find an answer. So this problem, we're subtracting. So we want to go ahead and add the opposite first. So we'll make our two sign changes here. Normally at that point, adding fractions, we would need to get a common denominator. They didn't ask me to actually work it out, though. They're just asking whether my answer would be positive, negative, or 0. At this point, I know I have a negative fraction plus another negative fraction. Then I know my answer is going to be negative. These fractions are working together, so I would add them and keep that negative sign. Okay, let's go ahead and look at number 3. They want us to find the value of this expression. These are both decimals, so we're ready to go with this. So it's an addition problem. These signs are opposites. One's positive, one's negative. So different signs, we're going to take the difference. So we're going to subtract here. Is 1 4/10, and notice we did have more negatives than positives, so answer would be negative 1 4/10. Number 4, again, they're not asking us to necessarily work it out all the way. If we can figure out without working it out all the way whether our answer would be positive, negative, or 0. So right now this is a subtraction problem. Subtraction, we can add the opposite, make our two sign changes in the middle, add the opposite, and everything at that point is positive. So if we add a positive fraction and a positive fraction, we get a positive fraction. Again, if we were actually working this out, again, we would have to get a common denominator before we could add those together. 5b, they want us to draw the point on the number line that represents negative 1/3 minus negative 5/12. So this one, notice on the number line they've got decimals here. So decimals, we've got fractions. So I would probably just keep these as fractions for right now. Reason being, otherwise it's going to be more work for you. Plus 1/3 is a repeating decimal, so that's not really going to work for you to change them to decimals and then subtract. So first thing here, this is a subtraction problem, so we're going to want to go ahead and add the opposite. And we're actually working it out this time, so we would need to get a common denominator. Biggest denominator we've got right now is 12. If we multiply 3 times 4, that gets us to 12, so 12 could be our common denominator. And the book put the negative sign next to the fraction. I don't really like that because that can blur in with our fraction bar if we're not careful. So I like to put the negative sign up in the numerator. And at that point we've got negative 4/12 plus 5/12. When you add or subtract fractions, your denominator stays the same. And if we do this, negative 4 plus 5, this would be 1/12, a positive 1/12. They're different signs, so we would subtract basically 5 minus 4. They're working against each other here, and we have more positives than negatives. So 1/12, if we were going to put this on a number line, we've got 1/12. So depending if I was allowed to use a calculator or not, if I was not allowed to use a calculator, I could divide this out. 12 does not go into 10. 12 goes into 100. 8 times would be 96. 12 goes into 40. 3 times would be 36. And what's going to happen, this is actually going to be a repeating decimal. Okay, so it's between 800ths and 900ths. Well, we've got tenths here though, so if you'll notice, our tenths place is a 0. So we're actually between 0 tenths, which is really just 0 and 1/10. So we're between 0 and 1/10, closer to 1/10. So somewhere about here would be where we could put our dot for that one. Number 7, the temperature one morning was negative 4.7 degrees Fahrenheit. And rose to 11.6 degrees Fahrenheit that night. Find the difference in the temperatures. Pretty cold. So finding the difference means we're going to subtract. Remember we've talked about finding differences. We're going to take the high temperature minus the low. So 11.6 minus negative 4.7. Don't rush this. A lot of people I see do this. They just put 11.6 minus 4.7. They're on a speed mission to get the wrong answer. Okay, this is what we've got. Then we can add the opposite. They're both decimals. They're both positives. So we should be good to go to add these together. So we add those together would be 16.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, the stuff we're doing here, really we should be able to get by doing these without calculators. We'll not be using calculators on the test, so don't prepare yourself for a crutch that will not be there when we actually do this thing. Number 11, a researcher in a personal submarine begins at the surface of the ocean. Submarine descends 20.6 meters, then ascends 5 7/10 meters. What is the depth of the personal submarine? Okay, so this one with our religion background, we may know about these things. So descends is going down, ascends is going up. So descends 20.6 meters. So this would be a negative 20.6, and then ascends is going up, so that's a positive 5 7/10. This is like what we looked at earlier in the book, where we've got one is a decimal and one's a fraction. So like I said, probably getting the fraction to the decimal, unless it's a repeating decimal, might be a good idea. So this one, with our denominator being 10, that is 5 7/10. Decimal would be 5 7/10. And then we just need to think about now what we need to do with these numbers. So these are different signs. We're going to take the difference here. We've got more of the negatives. Now it shows up. So 20 6/10 minus 5 7/10. We'd have to do some borrowing here. is 14 9/10, and we had more that were negative, so this would be negative 14.9. And fortunately that matches up with one of their answers, so that's a good sign that we probably, well, not necessarily, but at least there's a chance that we got that right, and we did. Confidence, we know what we're doing here. So this gives you an idea about adding and subtracting rational numbers.